Welcome to this week's edition of The African Dilemma with your host Nathan Kiwere. And today I'm joined by our friend and previous guest, Engineer Leron Kagonyara. Manu is passionate about farming. Why don't you want to be called engineer?
I'm not registered, so
I'm not familiar with things, so you have to be registered to be, even if your training is actually in.
Yeah.
That applies with architecture as well? Same. Anyways, you're welcome.
Thank you.
As usual, we are going to dive deep into some of the issues that affect the African continent. Historical, social, practical, political, and so on. And, last week we talked about Africa as a dark continent.
Yes.
And it was quite revealing how, a designation that was baptized to this nation could, become like the official, description of a continent for reasons that were known to certain people, and who were taught the things in school.
Poster child.
Yeah, and some of the things need to be corrected.
They do.
So in the same way, there are many historical wrongs or mistakes that have happened on this continent, which still continue to affect, to date, to affect the continent.
Yes, sir.
In different ways. And I just want us to talk about some of the things, because as you already know, Africa is a continent that is so diverse, economically, culturally, demographically. We are such a diverse continent.
Extremely diverse.
If you move from Southern Africa to West, you may think that you've gone to a different continent altogether.
Correct.
Yeah, and yet, if you look at the history, of Africa, there are many things that have disadvantaged its people.
Yes.
Historical mistakes. And one of the obvious ones, of course, is a transatlantic slave trade. Correct. Do you agree?
To a certain extent, yes. To an extent, no. I think for me, the slave trade, the context is really not known about what our country was like during that time. Because we're really very exploited to a certain extent that makes it almost, you can't figure out how much we missed people. But of course, the obvious disadvantages we must have had in terms of losing people. The human capital drain. But then were we productive? But we're always outside the economy. You understand? So we're not in the money economy as the Europeans were. So in terms of how that affected us today, I think it affected us in ways that were more social than economic.
You think so?
I think so.
Let me give you some context. Slave trade started in the 1600 AD, 16th or 15th century, and it went on for 400 years.
But it was introduced by the Arabs, right?
Yes, but the Europeans came and joined in, and millions of people during that time, millions of Africans were taken away from their homeland.
Yes.
To faraway lands, and they were subjected to a lot of, unthinkable horrors.
Yes.
Yes. But you know what that means? Because they came to communities and carried away men, productive men. They didn't take lame people or blind people. No. They took able-bodied men and women.
Yes.
And these were the people who were supporting these societies. So what happens is, because of slave trade, there was huge, massive demographic decline, first of all. Right?
That, yes.
If you come to this city, this town, and you take away half of the people, you leave children and women and the disabled. Do you know what you will have caused to their level of productivity? I don't care about human economy and all that. People are producing within their means.
Yes.
It was an agrarian economy.
It was
most of it agrarian. So they took away men, and this led to a total disruption of traditional society.
Correct.
In many diverse ways. So productivity went down, I believe it took time for some of these societies to grow back, to find their footing again, you know, and who knows, maybe they were not able to go back to where they were.
I don't think they were
So
able to go back.
in that sense alone, I think slave trade was one of the biggest evils that have befallen, this continent.
As an evil, I believe it. I can't agree. I can't disagree with you on the fact that it was an evil, but in terms of lingering effects, I think it was more traumatic on us in terms of the social events than it was in terms of other things. Because if you look at it, most times when these people raided these communities, they were either killed, wiped out, whoever remained was assimilated into the other community, and then the others were sold out into slave trade. The ones who were rebellious, or who could be able to form an rebellion against these people. So it was a proper capitalism mechanism of man eateth man, and look, for me, I the context of these things is, it's like that. It's like a proverb that says the king is far away, the mountains are high, and the king is far away. Sometimes I can't see it. In my perspective, I literally can't see it. It's too far away. The generations have gone so far along that every time I think back to the timing, the season, the centuries.
So I think that ideally, in spite of whatever happened as a result of slave trade,
yes,
African societies they had enough time to evolve.
Yes,
and
100%.
And rediscover themselves and start. I think that's easier said than done.
I think the reality is that people's lifespans have the longevity of human life has really just come up of age now. It's now. Back in the day, I think my father used to, has always said that people never. It was always a blessing to reach 60. 60 was almost unheard of. So most people died around 40, and I think his father died around 40. So you realize that people used to die young then. So if people used to die young then, somehow I don't see how that.
Do you know why? Is there a reason why they were dying young? The lifespan was so low, or?
As unusual. Disease. Maybe you don't have treatment for a few of the things we have now. I don't know. Maybe quality of life. But they also had wars. Wars were part of the natural cycle of things then. So death and life was a natural cycle for them that was really short. It was a really short cycle for them. So for me, if you're going to be talking about people who are affected, maybe you can. I really feel for our brothers who are taken, but they were taken because we sold them. Fact.
They were not stolen. They were not forcibly stolen.
We sold them. We would raid, because the reality is there were no Arabs or Europeans in the inner continent seeking out slaves. We would get them, take them to the
So Africans were selling fellow Africans.
Africans sold fellow Africans for economic gain. So when I always laugh at how the Black Americans keep talking about how first of all, I like how they talk about how they turn to Islam as about fighting white supremacy and slave trade. Yet the Arabs are the ones who brought slave trade to Africa. They introduced it. The Europeans, all Europeans did and Americans did was that they just took that whole industry and just industrialized it, took it to an industrial scale. But really, they just used the same systems that were already existing. So it's really sad for those who are taken and their descendants, because they lost their identity. They've gone through a lot, but we thank God that they survived, and hopefully they can make a life for themselves. I know reparations, and all are always talking about reparations, and maybe we'll talk about it another time. But generally, for us who stayed here, we have I don't think we have any reason to say that we failed to get back on our feet and move. It can I don't think slave trade can linger so much on for us. We can't hold everything back down to slave trade for us.
Yeah, just think about the level of disruption of African traditional society. All right.
Yes.
Especially, I mean, Africans had a way of life.
Yes.
Lived a structured way with the man and the leader, and everyone in society had their roles.
Yes.
You know, the men, depending on the economic, structure, were either gatherers or the defenders, while the women also had their own, roles, and so are the children.
Yes.
So when you come and take away certain key members of society. The traditional society
breaks down.
it breaks down. The structures break down, and it can take time to rebuild. And that's if you're able to go back to where you were. I believe there was also mass displacement.
Of course.
Where people were forced to go to lands which were not originally theirs, and they are forced to adapt and all that. So, despite the time that has passed, you cannot say that this did not have an adverse effect on African society.
I'm sure it did, and don't get me wrong. I'm sure that there was there's a problem, but must have been in a short to medium term. When we come to long term, I feel like the long term means that we should have been able to cater for that moment to recover from those times. Instead, what you're talking about seems to me like a case like for South Africans who for them, their lands were taken from them. The Boers, the British and then the Boers came and took their lands. Now that for them, that lingers up to today. That colonization where now the people came and took over the land, and now the much of the wealth of a country now holds in the hands of a few. And then you think about now as I think about the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters of South Africa, coming up to say we need our lands back. And for me, I feel like those guys, for them, they make a point, because if so much is taken from people forcibly for nothing, and the indigenous people are left with little to nothing, living in shacks, and then now all of a sudden these people are saying, man, for some form of equality, maybe they need some bit of land. They need some form of land balancing. I feel like the reason why we are Africans is because we own land in Africa. If we didn't own land in Africa, how are we called Africans? We're just dark. Yeah. So for me, I understand, and even the Mugabe concept in Zimbabwe. You kind of look. So the whites feel that they're being unfairly treated, but hey, it's the same thing that was done to what? Something that was done to the indigenous people at the time. So, for me, if you took something for free, and the land is still bare, you should also give it up for free. If you put something there, I feel like then maybe there's be some form of compensation because you've done something with the land. But if the land is bare, if you took it for free, it should be given for free.
When you say that these slave traders didn't actually in person raid communities.
No, they didn't.
Which I think sometimes they were involved. I don't know. We don't have all the information.
Don't have all the information. But the parties were largely African.
What does that speak about Africans? How the total disregard of African life, whereby people are ready to trade their own people.
I think it goes also the nation building aspect of it. If you're looking at all these kingdoms, you could also call them nations. So if you have Buganda, Bunyoro, these were all nations. So, and all these nations literally also had their own boundaries. So these people so if a white man comes and redraws a boundary and causes these smaller nations to become one big nation, the problem you have is that that assimilation takes time for people to become one, a united front. So I think Uganda being like a young nation, we've had to take time to bond and realize that that we are beyond our borders that we used to that we knew. So so for me, once you look at if you can look at, so once you have nations, these little nations coming up against each other, once they were eating up another community, it wasn't that they were eating up their own people. They were just eating up another nation. It was just the way of life. They are strong, eat the weak.
And now when you talk of people lived outside of the cash economy.
Yes.
And they were basically producing for themselves, for family.
Yes. And conquest, I guess.
And what?
And conquest.
Conquest, yes.
I think the only thing that made sense was, you raid some people, you get more land to farm, maybe you get more wives, maybe you get, I don't know. But I think the fight for resources has never stopped at any one point. We've always fought for resources. I think what changes is that now we have a medium of trade for like money. Then it was just simply, you go and fight for what is yours. If you have a battle, I take what you have. We can barter trade. So there was a system that was working. It just didn't work like the European system. Yes.
I just wanted to scratch on the surface a little bit about another evil that came right on the heels of slave trade.
Yes.
It's something I would like to discuss, maybe for us to talk about in the subsequent, episode of the African dilemma. But this is about colonialism. At the end of slave trade, while Africans thought now we are free, we are liberated, then came the colonialists.
Yes, a 1-2 punch.
And before they had recovered, so now they have to deal with the new evil. Now these people have come, the so-called designators of the dark continent.
Yes.
And they now introduce a new system of subjugation.
Yes.
Yes. And which played out in different ways, like we spoke in our previous episode. The British had a deep and direct rule, where they used the indigenous to rule their fellow indigenous, with the British as the force behind, vis-a-vis the French, who preferred the direct form of rule, which is the policy of assimilation.
Yes.
And the results of which were different, because the British tried to live the way of life of the locals as they found it, preservation. The French sought to change. To make the Africans become like French people, except in black skins, and all those have ramifications, different kinds of ramifications. But for me, I think colonialism really compounded the challenges of Africans in many ways, and the principal one was the arbitrary partitioning of
Africa, yes,
in different national borders. Without any regard to the cultures, the political situation.
Yes.
Because you can imagine, there were ethnic groups in Africa that had historical conflicts, whose conflicts were historical in nature. And so what they did, they come and say, Uganda passes here, there, Kenya that way. They didn't bother to do basic research, a survey, baseline survey. Say at least, even if we've decided to divide this land, we should be aware that there are certain dynamics which we need to put in consideration. So they ended up pitting tribes belligerent tribes against one
each other,
another,
yes.
by forcing them within the same national borders.
Mm.
I say now this is Kenya, this is Uganda, this is Sudan, and that way I believe they sowed seeds of conflict.
They did, but for me, I think in any process of nation building, Uganda is if you look at our country, Uganda, 1962, it's about what, it's almost 70 years. It's about over 70 years old. We're really teenagers, and maybe even barely adolescents. The reality is that when you're looking at any nation, there's a conflict stage. So you fight because you're not used to each other, and when you fight, over time, you realize you're going nowhere because you realize that person is also going nowhere. So you find a way of amicably finding ways of coexisting, or even now coexisting. We're now finding ways of working together. That nation building stage is important for any nation, for anything to go. If you look at countries, if you look at Europe, their history is full of all these fights and wars. America, 400 years old, it's the same. China, also a very ancient civilization. So many wars moving on. You look at Egypt, conflicts after conflicts. Over time, you merge. You do some nation building. Is it easy? Was it the best way for us? No, but it was what was put on us. I feel like, look, there are things we can complain about, and I understand it. And the colonists were evil in more ways than one. However, the bit about human nature is that somehow we always find a way of building, surviving, going past these things. So we've survived the British. I think that's how I look at it. We've survived the British. We are learning how to coexist as different tribes. We are learning to become one. We are learning to work together. That forming process is important for us. However, could we have done it? Could have done it different? Is that maybe the question that you're looking at? How would it have been different? The reality is that every time you've had to fight for resources, and there was no real commerce, it just makes life difficult for you to find a way of building anything without having to destroy something. The zero-sum game of, if I have to take something from you, if I have to gain something, I have to take it from you. That zero-sum game I feel like if you have no form of commerce, no form of medium of exchange, if you have something, I have to come and forcibly take it from you so that I can have it and leave you with nothing. However, if you have some form of commerce, I can give you the money and take what you have, and you have money so that you can go and get something else. The reality is, we're in a bad situation. That's our reality. We're in a bad situation. We've been given up our cards. You can't change our cards. I think we can always look back and complain about the past, but for me, complaining about the past is just not helping us in any way, because our dangers are definitely present and future.
They are, absolutely. But you can't imagine what the situation would have been like had not this evil happened in the first place. Yes.
Could have taken longer, maybe? I think it would have taken longer. I think it would have taken a longer process to kind of catch up with people, but generally, the commercialization, that commerce part of the colonization had to come in for things to settle down. For us to realize that but even just to bring in other industries, knowledge industry, to realize that there are other people beyond our boundaries, to trade with them, technologies, shipping, to realize about security. Sometimes they even say to prepare for war, if you want peace, you prepare for war. So sometimes by arming yourselves as a nation, the other nations are wary of fighting you simply because they might also take a big loss. It feels like every time this topic has come through for me, I feel a little disarmed because what can I do about the past? I can learn from it, but I don't think I can do much more than that.
You see, before colonization, Africa was borderless. You
Yes.
know? It was
Yes.
borderless.
Yes.
I imagine what it would have been like if
Now that
Africa.
Now
had
you're
remained borderless.
bringing the real point. Now, do you know that taxation was never meant to exist? Taxation is a way governments steal from the people legally. But if you look at like a history of like America, they fought against any form of taxation. So you realize that actually taxes were taxes like the same way inflation works. Every piece of everything, I take a piece of everything you work on. I take a piece. So taxes are not the legal way things were supposed to be done. So this boundaries really just caused us massive problems because already we had a taxation system which is not a fair system for the people. Because in reality, think about it. If you put up the roads and you put up it's like how you have the PPP, public-private partnerships in terms of like infrastructure. And every time I have to use the infrastructure, I pay for it. It works. As no one has said, no one has collapsed because of that method. I think people can pay off whatever you put there. So for me, I've always felt that the economic system, how the economic system works, unfortunately, is rigged to work in a way that does not favor the people. I think that for me is the more important part. The systems that were left behind, that actually not were left behind, but the white man will still uses it in his own backyard. Those systems favor the few.
I can imagine. As we draw to the close of this show, as I mentioned, that before the colonization, Africa was borderless.
Yes.
And now, that time, they had trade routes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Different societies were connected economically.
Yes.
Through certain trade routes.
Yes.
Now, when they created borders, they actually destroyed, they cut off these trade routes.
Mm.
Now, people had to trade either internally or cross borders, which had its own dynamics.
That's own dynamics.
Today it has become really more difficult because
extremely
now
difficult
to cross from one country to another, some countries it's really hard.
Yes.
Africa, between fellow Africans, cannot go to another country without a visa.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. Most African
and most African countries, and which is quite pathetic. So if you say that this is not affecting us to now,
no, that one has affected us in more adverse ways than most of the points that you've actually given. I feel like for us to survive as a continent, first of all, most of the white man thinks that Africa is one country for some reason, which I've never understood. I don't know how you can think of Africa as one country. They think of us as a continent, think of us as a country.
Yes.
Which is funny enough. But then they make a point. If we were one country, how would it work? Because in a continent of 1 billion people, where we can literally intra-trade within each other, and the demand is enough to cater for everything we're producing for. Why wouldn't we have done that a long time ago? I don't know if, and the problem we have that the richness of our diversity has become our problem, our Achilles heel. Now, we have to constantly work towards forming and joining to become a united front. Of course, I think we are getting there. I think we've made a lot of progress over the years. I didn't think we'd even ever get to a free continental trade area, but we are there. I think Nigeria has signed. I don't know if the other country has signed. So one more country that hasn't yet signed, maybe, but we've done a lot of progress. And so for me, the partition of the continent has been more detrimental, and has had more lasting effects on us as a people than most of the other things that we have really talked about. I think those are a few things that, for me, going forward, we need to always look at. So it's like how you have a fight with a person and you come out with a bloody face. Most times a bloody face looks bad, and it is bad, but most times you'll heal. Come out with a broken bone, that might not be different. Those effects might be there for a while.
Yeah.
So a broken bone for me in this case is definitely the partitioning of the continent. Yes. So for me those are a few things that I always look at and I think are key for me in terms of us moving forward. I think we have, like I said last time, we have tragedies, and all continents have tragedies. If you go to any continent and any people, there are tragedies. But for me, I'm a person who will always say, man, if we've survived some things, let bygones be bygones. Let's move forward. Of course, we can't forget our history, but we cannot cling onto our history to now make decisions for our future.
Thank you so much, Lennon. Always a pleasure to have you on this show.
So no, it was fantastic.
For your great insights.
The good discussions.
And for our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in today. We look forward to having more of this conversation. We Definitely. Have one more episode to conclude this colonization project and how it affected the African continent.
Fantastic.
It's been Nathan Kiwere. Until then, see you.